Hey friends, welcome to Rugged Outdoors Guide. My name is Pete, and today we're going to be talking about something that I have some experience with. I'm not like a super ultra pro that has been doing this for 20 years, but I do have enough of experience to give you my opinion on this, and I think it's a valid opinion, but you judge for yourself. We're talking about pedal drive versus paddle drive in kayak propulsion systems. And in case some of you are still on the fence about what that is and you're not totally sure, paddle drive is like paddles, like a diver's flippers, kind of like a Mirage drive, the most famous kind, Mirage from Hobie. All right, that's your sort of the standard in paddle drive kayak propulsion systems. And then you've got pedal drive, which is really a propeller that's pushing the kayak through the water instead of paddles. And kind of the propel system is probably the standard in this category, though there are others. So I just want to be upfront with you about the fact that I haven't tried every single paddle propulsion system or pedal propeller propulsion system. All right, there's just too many of them, and they're coming out new ones every year. Hobie has some of its latest designs that are just have some really unique features and make them really kind of cool. But what I'm doing is I'm just giving you an overall view on the generic abilities of both types of systems. So I don't want to talk about any sort of proprietary system. Just want to give you my overview of my experiences using both sort of generic systems. I don't have a propel drive, though I do have a right here. I've got it's pretty much identical. I mean, I can't tell the difference between a real propel and this one. This is a generic one out of Korea. And there are so many generic paddle drives out there as well, not just the Hobies. Now, I believe the patent has expired on the Hobie paddle drive, and so now pretty much any country, overseas, domestic, they can make pedal or paddle drives. So I'm going to give you sort of my take on why I like one over the other and some of the advantages that each one has over the other. I've seen a few people online giving reviews about pedal versus paddle, and they say that the Mirage style drives are faster. Now, I have to admit I haven't tried the latest one. What I have tried is some of the generic Mirage style drives. I can tell you without any reservation that the propeller drive is significantly faster. That's been my experience. It's not only faster, but it takes off a lot faster on the bottom end when you're accelerating from a standstill. I have been able to get my paddle drive kayak up to 3 miles per hour, and I thought that was pretty good. That was faster than I was going with just using my hand paddle. But the propeller drive got me up to a full 5 miles an hour, almost 6. So had I hit 6, it would have been pretty much twice the speed of the paddle drive. So again, that's my experience, may not be yours. Before I get into some of the negatives about the propeller drive, I'll continue on with a couple of the positives, right? So one of the things is that you've got instant reverse. Okay, that is something that even the most expensive, fanciest Mirage drives from Hobie cannot accomplish. With a Hobie, you've got to pull a lever, and you've got to, there's a couple of steps involved before you can reverse. This one is instant reverse, and the greatest thing is you can be standing up in the kayak and you can still do a reverse. You can just kind of reach down. You don't even have to reach down very far, but you would just reach down and just kind of pull it back, and you've got a little bit of reverse. So you can't do that with a Hobie. The other thing I really like about the reverse is that you can, contrary to what I've heard online from a couple of reviewers, you can steer your canoe in reverse. It's the same thing. It's got a rudder, and when water passes past the rudder, you can steer as long as you're moving in one way, one direction or the other. And so I can steer backwards and do it instantly, something that no paddle drive can match. All right, and one other thing that I cannot forget to mention here is that this thing is built pretty much literally like a tank, right? It's like I don't know exactly what steel it's made out of, but it's fairly heavy, and I mean it's gonna take you through whatever you put it through. It's not gonna break very easily at all. Right? It's like a Propel drive. It is a this one is like a clone of the Propel drive, and it's wow, like I don't know what to say. I know that it's going to last a very, very long time. I happen to know that the paddle drive that I reviewed and used for quite a while is not anywhere near as solid as this. It's actually quite fragile. You can break the paddles, you can rip them. They're just like a membrane that flexes in the water, which is what makes them work in the first place. So you really can't compare the two when it comes to durability over the long term. Okay, so is this like the best option for you? Well, not necessarily. There are some kind of downsides to this, if you will. Number one, it's kind of the opposite of what I just mentioned. Because of the durability of it on the plus side, it's also very, very heavy. Now, it's not too heavy to carry. It's normal, but yeah, if you want to just compare them, yeah, it's going to be heavier. It's also a little bit more awkward to store. It can't be kind of folded down flat like the paddle drive can be. So you just have to be aware of that, store it appropriately, and you'll be fine. When it comes to actually traveling with this particular drive, the propeller is going to be slightly louder. And when I say slightly louder, I mean ever so slightly louder. They both make noise. The only other noise that I've noticed that this kayak made that the other one that I reviewed not long ago with the paddle drive didn't make is the sound of the water because of the wake that you're making, because you're moving so much faster. This was kind of plowing through the water and I could hear the water gurgling, but that doesn't have anything to do directly with the fact that this is a propeller drive. It just has to do with the fact that it was moving faster, which is a good thing. So, but technically, yes, it is a little bit louder, but I have found in the little experience that I've had is that it doesn't really affect your fishing effectiveness. It's not like the propeller is going to scare all the fish away while the paddles don't, right? It's not quite that big a difference. The only other negative thing I found with the propeller drive is that it can gather right around the propeller itself, like any motor in the world. It can gather weeds if you're going through lily pads. You know, the stalks of the lily pads or the stems, they're perfect to just wrap around any propeller, right? And so the paddle drive, the Hobie Mirage drive, is not going to gather weeds in the same way. Now, having said that, the Mirage drive is not great in weeds. It just isn't. You're going to get hung up in heavy weeds just as you will with the propeller drive. The difference is that you can easily glide out of the weeds by bringing the paddles up against the bottom of the canoe by just putting one foot all the way forward and the other all the way back. So it can get out of the way, and then you can use your paddle to get out. All right, so there's a tiny bit of advantage in weeds over this drive where you have to just pull it out, which is no big deal, but it is one step more than you have to do with the Mirage. As I mentioned earlier, the paddle drive, the Mirage drive, is not great in weeds, but it also won't gather weeds and get clogged up by weeds as much as a propeller drive. So I would consider that an advantage. Mark one for the Mirage drive. Okay, so I've got a couple other pretty significant advantages with some of the newer Mirage drives, and that is that they can turn so you can when you pedal, you can go, well, not pedal, but when you engage the drive with your feet going back and forth like this, you can travel laterally, like not the whole kayak, but mostly the front end can just kind of pivot or swivel where it is. Whereas with the propeller drive, you have to be moving forward and then use a rudder. So your turn is going to be a little bit wider, of course. Whereas the pedal drive, the Mirage drive, some of the newer ones, you can kind of turn it and it can go laterally. All right, so that's kind of I would say that's a fairly big deal in some cases, but you're doing a bit of a trade-off, I think, with the instant reverse. So, hey, they're both, by the way, I just want to throw in right now, they're both great drives. I happen to have this one here because at this point, this is the kayak that I own. It's from a company called Das King. They're from Ontario, Canada. Not that that matters necessarily, but they are a good company. If you're considering a fishing kayak, you can check them out in Collingwood, Ontario, and that's what this particular one, this is called a Das King Nautilus, and it has a propel drive, just like the ones you'd find on like native kayaks, for example. And so each one has their advantages and their disadvantages for sure. And so far I'm liking this one just because it can go a lot faster and it's got instant reverse compared to the paddle drive that I recently was able to use for a while. A couple other things to consider about the paddle drive, I guess on the negative side, and I've mentioned them a bit. I've mentioned positives and negatives a number of times just to kind of, get it in there. But it's cumbersome to reverse. You can reverse some of them, but cumbersome. The generic brand paddle propulsion systems, they cannot even reverse. So if you want any reverse, you've got to go to an actual Hobie Mirage system. So there again is a disadvantage because a lot of the newer, sort of the less expensive kayaks that are not like $5,000 to $10,000 like a good Hobie would be, those are the ones where you are going to have no ability to go backwards. So something to consider there. It can be quite a big deal. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the fragility of the paddles is greater than this tank right here. So that's not to say that it will break, but I have heard many stories of them breaking, and there's lots of parts available for anyone who does run into problems. And in fact, one of the big issues is that if you have to replace one of the paddles, you're looking at quite a bit of money, like over $100, whereas if you're replacing any normally replaceable parts on a propel drive, like the propeller, for example, or I don't know, I don't know what else would break here, but it's nowhere near the expense of getting a new paddle. And I don't think it'll probably break at all anyway, based on just kind of my feel for it. Paddling the two of them, I would say that the paddle drive just felt more fragile. It was kind of cool when I first started doing it, as your feet are going back and forth, they're not going around like this. The other thing to keep in mind too is that the motion of your legs is very different for each of those drives. The paddle drive, they're just going back and forth like this, and your legs are not as high as your one leg will be when you go around pedaling like this, right? Your one leg is going to go a lot higher, and then it comes lower as the other one goes higher, just like riding a bike. Only this time you're lying back or sitting back, and your legs are straight forward. So your legs are, one of them is going higher and then lower, and then higher and lower, higher and lower, whereas the pedal drive, or paddle, sorry, you're just kind of going back and forth like this. So it's a different motion. I would say in the long term, the pedal drive where you're going like this, like a bicycle, it can cause you a little bit more discomfort because one of your legs, well, both of your legs at different times are going higher than the paddling. And so you're engaging your muscles more, intensely at that point where it's higher. So anyway, I don't want to get too technical, but I think you know what I'm talking about. It is a bit of an issue. The first time I went out with this, the next morning I was kind of sore down, where my legs meet my butt in that area because I was using muscles I never use. All right, and the last thing I just want to mention is that the advantages of the paddle drive where your feet are going like this, they're advantages if you're comparing the propeller drive with a Mirage, a Hobie Mirage drive, and one of the newer ones that has some of the advantages of being able to go laterally and such. If you're comparing this drive, propel drive, to some of the generic paddle drives, which don't have any special features, there's no reverse, there's no lateral, nothing like that, I think this one shines tremendously, even though they both have their advantages. All right, so one of the things I just want to mention here, just in conclusion, is that the advantages you're going to get from a paddle drive are really only if you have the latest, greatest Hobie Mirage drives that can go in reverse and they can push you laterally. If you don't have that and you're comparing the propel drive that I have here with a generic version of a Mirage or a paddle drive, then there's really no comparison. The paddle drive is slower, it's more fragile, it has no versatility other than moving you forward at a slower pace than this moves you forward. But that's it. This one can do instant reverse, and it can go forward a lot faster, and you can steer going backwards and forwards, and it'll last longer, it's cheaper to fix, and it's sturdier. That is for sure. If you get a Hobie Mirage, so some of the latest drives, I would say it's kind of a toss-up for me, because some of those drives are actually very cool. The way that they can maneuver and move your kayak, the way that they can glide through shallow water, the way that they can go very fast. So I don't know, that would be a toss-up. But as far as generic brands, I would say, in my opinion, I would say stick with the propeller drive. Some people have thought that maybe it's too awkward to lift this up when you get into shallow water and you don't want to, scrape the bottom. It's not. Here it is, right here. It just pivots. Now you can lock it down in the water if you wanted to, but it's so heavy that you don't need to lock it down there. It just stays down there. And there's a handle right on the back, so that as soon as you're entering shallow water, you just pull this up, and then you can rest it with the propeller turned, across the entrance, I guess, whatever you want to call it, the opening, and it just sits like this temporarily until you get out of the water, and then you just, out of the shallow water, and then you can plop it back down. So it's really not a problem when you're in shallow water. Don't let that scare you away from getting a propeller drive. As far as price differences, the generic versions are very similar one to another in price, I have found. Now obviously if you're getting a Hobie Mirage, you're going to be paying a premium for that. That's kind of like in a different category. But for most of the kayaks that are out there, the pedal drive versus paddle drive, the price is very, very similar. All right guys, I really appreciate you stopping by to check out this review on the pedal versus paddle drive. I'm curious to know what you think. I'm curious to know what your experiences are. Have you had a Mirage or a generic paddle drive? Please do let me know. I'd love to hear from you. You can comment. Just want to let you know that if you do appreciate reviews and tips like this, please do give me a like and a subscribe. It's no skin off your back, as I've said many times before, but YouTube just loves it and helps me rank a little bit better in the world of outdoors reviews and trip documentaries and all that kind of thing. Really appreciate it. Guys, until the very next time that you see me, please get out there, enjoy God's creation, and keep on looking up.